You've been listening to Carlos Ghosn breaking his silence, and that is no exaggeration. Joining us right now with reaction to what he's been saying for the last 53 minutes and counting is Mike Santoli. We're also joined by Jeff Sonnenfeld, the Senior Associate Dean for Leadership Studies at Yale School of Management and a CNBC contributor. Joshua Dratel, a criminal defense lawyer with extradition experience, and in Chicago, Phil LeBeau. Jeff, I'll start with you. Did he improve his case by what he said today?
Clearly, he could have used a little time with some public relations training. He's clearing his gut. He's trying to, in a cathartic way, get revenge out there, which is understandable. And he's made the point that he's never received the money, and there could have been board clearance on this, and he didn't get a chance to address the charges. But going on at this length and not being a chance, again, giving the media a chance to address it, it feels a little more like a filibuster than he would want, as we're not getting to the escape path, which is what the media wants to talk about and he doesn't want to talk about. But it's understandable. Emotionally, it's just not as effective.
In terms of what happens next, Josh, as somebody who knows extradition policy here, he looks like he's pretty safe where he is in Lebanon. What happens outside of Lebanon's borders?
That's risky for him, particularly after today, in the sense that there's no contrition about his departure, even though he's making a case for it being an injustice. Other countries don't necessarily want that to be the standard for criminal defendants to make decisions in that regard. And I understand that I've read that France has an investigation going as well, even though he's a citizen of France. So for him to cross any border at this point would be very risky for him. And it's a kind of a scorched earth presentation today, in that it doesn't necessarily set the table for a resolution of the charges in Japan, which he would have great leverage now, not being in the jurisdiction. He would have significant negotiating power to reach a resolution, but that doesn't seem to be on his mind.
Right.
And it puts the Japanese in a more difficult position to capitulate to him after today.
To not respond and to not continue to pursue this case. Phil, Josh is right in terms of scorched earth. He's named names of individuals, both at Nissan and in some cases, in the prosecutors and other places, where he says that these are the people who have wronged me, not to mention the media smear that he's been talking about for some time, too. I don't know. One of the instances, we still haven't gotten all of his thoughts yet on where Nissan, Renault, and Mitsubishi stand today, but he did make the point that those stocks have gone down 35% since his incarceration.
Yeah, and if you look at shares of Nissan, you can see it. I mean, it's a clear decline. And let's be honest, that relationship between Nissan, Renault, and Mitsubishi, it is fragile at best. It may fall apart. I think if the Japanese prosecutors do not engage, then this becomes one of those situations where Carlos Ghosn can say, look, I have X, Y, and Z in terms of documents, in terms of this is what was done that was incorrect or was misinterpreted. But if Japan doesn't engage, it's sort of a one-sided fight. And I'm not sure, Becky, how effective that will be towards the end goal, which is rehabilitating his image. And Jeff also makes the point off the top. Most of the media who are there, they're there, even though they have agreed, I mean, this is not open-ended. Not everybody under the moon could come into this press conference. They're not hearing what they want to hear, which is, how did you get out of this country? And how could you have orchestrated this on your own? And he's made it clear. He is not going to go into the details of that.
Mike, it's bruising. He did take on a lot of the injustices that he felt like he dealt with under the Japanese justice system. And I do have to say, when you're talking about 99.4% of people actually being found guilty at the end, that does raise questions. That was probably what was most empathetic about what happened from the very start with this. Not sure he's helping his case today.
It's just unclear as to whether he's going to have, the standing and the sway to create some kind of international scrutiny of the Japanese criminal justice system. I mean, what's the play here except to, I guess, in a public relations way, get some endorsement? Although I do think that in the time since his arrest, his premise is, I was the savior of Nissan. I was the only person who could hold this a kind of tenuous alliance together, 3 companies. Maybe that was true for a while, but I do think there's been a reevaluation of his management style and, in fact, of his strategy at Nissan, which is going for volume over everything else. So I'm not even sure that he's won that premise, which is that he was the only guy who could have done that.
Josh, he did mention Greg Kelly, his colleague who is still in prison in Japan. He said we can't forget his ordeal. He's being punished because he's honorable and refused to go along with the sham plea bargain that Carlos Ghosn called it. But what is his fate at this point?
He's still subject to the prosecution, although it may make it easier for him to negotiate a resolution that would be more favorable to him, given that Ghosn is no longer available. But also it could, I don't know whether he feels betrayed or whether or not now he's in a position to assist the prosecution with respect to Ghosn and could make a different kind of deal.
On that, we do have, of course, legitimate medical considerations that released him from prison, and his condition hasn't gotten better. And he was arrested, and some would say abducted, when he already was on the edge of surgery. So they could come out with some escape that way, some release that way. And similarly, his wife has a cachet of emails that are quite exonerating, at least the way they're reported, that show that the board knew a lot more and that Carlos Ghosn never received this money.
Jeff, he is still speaking. What does he need to do in the rest of the time where he's talking to the media at this point? What would you like to hear, assuming we're not going to hear anything about the escape?
Well, he's got to explain these charges. He's danced around them. There's a home in Lebanon. There's a home in Beirut, a home in Brazil, and things like that. We need to understand what was the proper use of shareholder resources, and he has an explanation of the bonuses he never received.